What if the source of most human suffering is not what happens to us, but the story we tell ourselves about what it means? Over 2,000 years ago, a merchant lost his ship, his cargo, and his fortune to a storm, arrived in Athens with nothing, walked into a bookshop, picked up a book about Socrates, asked the bookseller where he could find people who lived like that, and founded one of the most enduring philosophies in Western history. Tonight, I am here with Rowan Haristeel.
Good evening, Clara.
Stoicism is often misunderstood as a philosophy of emotional suppression, of gritting your teeth and feeling nothing. It is not that. It is a precise and demanding discipline for understanding what is actually within your control and what is not, and for directing all of your energy toward the former while releasing the latter. Tonight, we turn to a philosophy that began on a painted porch in Athens, was practiced by a former slave and a Roman emperor, and is finding new expression in modern psychology because the problem it addresses has not changed. The question is not what Stoicism says, but what it asks of you, and whether what it asks is something you are capable of giving.
Stoicism does not promise that life will become easy, or that you will stop feeling pain. It promises something more useful, that if you learn to distinguish what is within your power from what is not, the things that are not within your power lose their capacity to destroy you. This is not a small claim. It is, if correct, one of the most practically significant ideas in the history of philosophy.
We are speaking about Stoicism, the philosophical tradition founded by Zeno of Citium, most demanding circumstances a human life can produce.
Its most enduring practitioners include a man who was born into slavery, a man who was one of the wealthiest and most powerful figures in Rome, and a man who ruled the largest empire in the Western world. That all three found Stoicism not only persuasive but necessary for navigating their specific circumstances tells us something about the philosophy's unusual range.
Then let us begin with the shipwreck, and with the man who turned catastrophe into a philosophical vocation.
Zeno of Citium was born around 334 before the Common Era in Citium, a city on the island of Cyprus that had a mixed Greek and Phoenician population. He was a merchant, probably trading in purple dye, a valuable commodity in the ancient world. On a voyage to Piraeus, the port of Athens, his ship was wrecked and his cargo lost. He arrived in Athens stripped of the material wealth that had defined his identity and his prospects to go. The story of his encounter with philosophy begins in a bookshop in Athens, where he picked up a copy of the Memorabilia of Xenophon, an account of the life and conversations of Socrates. He was so affected by what he read that he asked the bookseller where he could find people who lived as Socrates had lived. The bookseller pointed to Crates of Thebes, a cynic philosopher who happened to be passing. Zeno followed him, studied with him, and eventually developed his own philosophical school.
So the shipwreck was not the end of something, but the beginning.
Yes. Zeno is said to have remarked later in life that the shipwreck had been the most fortunate event of his life. Whether or not he said this exactly, the sentiment is philosophically consistent. The loss of external goods had forced him toward the discovery of something the Stoics would later argue was the only genuine good, virtue, understood as the proper use of reason. He began teaching in the Stoa Porciel, the painted porch, a colonnaded walkway in Athens decorated with murals. His followers became known as Stoics, those of the porch. The name is important because it suggests something about the character of the philosophy. Zeno did not teach in a private academy restricted to those with appropriate backgrounds or means. He taught in a public space where anyone could listen. From the beginning, Stoicism was a philosophy designed for life, as it is actually lived, in public, under pressure, amid the ordinary complications of existence. The metaphysical foundation of Stoic thought is the concept of the logos, a Greek word meaning reason, order, or rational principle. The Stoics believed that the universe is not chaotic but governed by a rational structure, a kind of intelligence immanent in everything that exists. Events do not happen randomly. They are the outcome of causes operating according to a rational order that pervades nature. The wise person recognizes this order and aligns their own reason with it, understanding that fighting against the nature of things is a form of irrationality.
So Stoic resilience is not stubbornness. It is alignment with the actual structure of reality.
Yes, and here's the first thing we need to correct about the standard account. Stoicism is frequently described as a philosophy of passive acceptance, of simply enduring whatever happens without resistance. This misreads the tradition fundamentally. The Stoics were not passive. Marcus Aurelius fought military campaigns across the Danube frontier for most of his reign. Epictetus used his philosophy to resist the authority of those who held him in slavery. Seneca engaged actively in Roman political life. Stoicism is a philosophy of engaged, disciplined action, not of withdrawal. The central practical principle of Stoicism is what later philosophers have called the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, born into slavery in the 1st century of the Common Era, and who became one of the most influential Stoic teachers, opens his handbook the Enchiridion with a statement of this principle. Some things are within our power, he writes, and others are not. Within our power are our opinions, motivations, desires, and aversions. Not within our power are our bodies, property, reputation, and positions of authority. Epictetus understood this distinction from the most direct possible experience. As a slave, he had no control over his body, his circumstances, his legal status, or the decisions of those who held authority over him. What he retained was the capacity to choose his own response to all of this, to decide what meaning to assign to events, how to judge, how to act within whatever range of action was available to him. His teaching reflects the insight that this capacity, however constrained by external circumstance, is the one thing that cannot be taken entirely away.
Though Epictetus' philosophy was not theoretical, it was tested against conditions of radical unfreedom.
Yes, his remark that it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, is a compressed statement of the entire dichotomy. The event is not within your power. This does not mean that events have no significance, or that suffering is trivial, or that loss should not be felt. It means that the meaning you attach to an event, the judgment you make about whether it is good or bad, bearable or unbearable, permanent or temporary, is itself a product of your own reasoning, and therefore within reasoning, your power to revise. The 4 cardinal virtues of Stoicism are wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. Wisdom is the ability to judge correctly and act rationally, to distinguish appearance from reality and impulse from considered. Temperance is self-control and moderation, the capacity to regulate desire and aversion so that they do not override reason. Justice is the commitment to treating others fairly, to recognizing shared humanity, and acting accordingly regardless of how others have treated you. Courage is the capacity to face difficulty, uncertainty, and loss with clarity and integrity, rather than with avoidance or denial. Seneca, the Roman statesman and playwright who lived from approximately 4 before the Common Era to 65 of the Common Era, brought Stoicism to bear on the specific pressures of Roman political life, including the extraordinary danger of proximity to the Emperor Nero. His writings include a sustained engagement with the question of what it means to live well under conditions of extreme uncertainty about one's own survival. His observation that sometimes even to live is an act of courage is not a rhetorical flourish. It reflects the specific circumstances of his own life, in which the decision to continue engaging with the world carried genuine mortal risk. Seneca also engaged more directly than many Stoics with the question of social ethics. In his letters, he writes about the treatment of slaves, in terms that were unusual for his era, arguing that shared humanity does not disappear because of differences in legal status or social position. Consider that the man you call your slave sprang from the same seed, is warmed by the same sky, breathes and lives and dies just as you do. He was not calling for the abolition of slavery, but he was applying the Stoic principle of the common logos, the shared rational nature of all human beings, to argue for a form of basic human dignity that transcended legal categories.
So, Stoicism had ethical implications that extended beyond the individual's inner life.
Yes. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 of the Common Era, is perhaps the most remarkable case in the history of Stoic practice. He was one of the most powerful individuals in the ancient world, commanding armies, governing millions, and managing the most complex administrative challenge of the era. He was also writing privately a series of reflections on Stoic philosophy that he appears never to have intended for publication. The meditations are addressed to himself. They read as a set of ongoing reminders, attempts to apply Stoic principles to the specific difficulties of his own situation. You have power over your mind, he writes, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The line is not a piece of advice directed at others. It is a reminder he is giving himself in the midst of a reign that included military campaigns, plague, political betrayal, and the loss of children. The Stoic practice of negative visualization, sometimes called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, is one of the more counterintuitive, but practically significant Stoic exercises. Seneca recommended regularly imagining the loss of things one values, the health of people one loves, one's own financial security, one's position and reputation. The purpose is not to cultivate anxiety but to do the opposite, to reduce the hidden fear that comes from never allowing oneself to contemplate difficulty. A person who has genuinely considered the possibility of loss is less controlled by the fear of it than one who treats the possibility as unthinkable.
So regularly imagining what you fear is a method of reducing the power of that fear.
Yes, and this practice has a direct contemporary analog in exposure-based cognitive behavioral therapy, where confronting feared situations or thoughts in a controlled way reduces their emotional power over time. The Stoics arrived at the same insight through philosophical reasoning rather than clinical research. The convergence is another example of the philosophy's empirical accuracy about the human mind. The Stoic concept of living according to nature requires some clarification, because it can be misread as an instruction to live simply or to avoid comfort. What the Stoics meant by nature was the rational nature that distinguishes human beings from other animals. To live according to nature for a human being is to live according to reason, to allow the rational faculty to guide decisions rather than passion, impulse, or habit. Nature in this sense is not the physical environment, but the characteristic excellence of the human being.
So living according to nature means living according to what is most distinctively human.
Yes, this connects to the Stoic view of virtue as the only genuine good. External things, health, wealth, reputation, social position, are what the Stoics called preferred indifference. They are preferable to their opposites when all else is equal, but they are not genuine goods because they can be present in the life of a vicious person and absent from the life of a virtuous one. What determines the quality of a life is not what happens in it, but the character with which those events are met. The Stoic concept of cosmopolitanism, the idea that all human beings share a common rational nature and therefore belong to a single moral community that transcends national, ethnic, and social boundaries, was one of the most historically influential ideas the school produced. It entered Roman legal thinking, shaped the development of natural law theory, influenced the Enlightenment concept of universal human right, and continues to operate in contemporary debates about global justice and international obligation.
So the political implications of the Stoic idea of shared human reason extended far beyond the individual's inner life.
Yes, Zeno himself argued for a world city governed by reason rather than a collection of separate states governed by custom and self-interest. This was an idealistic vision that has never been realized. But the philosophical argument for it, that the rational nature shared by all human beings grounds a set of moral obligations that transcend political boundaries, has been one of the most productive ideas in the history of moral and political philosophy.
Before we close tonight, let us take a brief pause and welcome Margaret Evernight. Margaret, for those who want to encounter Stoic philosophy in its most direct and personal form, where would you invite them to continue in?
Thank you, Clara. In this case, the most direct path is also the most important one. I would suggest beginning with the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
So this is a text written not as a public philosophical treatise, but as a private record of one person's ongoing effort to live according to the principles they believed in.
The Meditations are a series of personal writings offering deep insight into Stoic philosophy as a practical guide to life, resilience, and self-mastery. Because they were not written for an audience, they have an honesty and an intimacy that is rare in philosophical literature. Marcus Aurelius is not trying to persuade anyone. He is trying to remind himself. The reader is admitted to that process.
Is it accessible to readers without a background in ancient philosophy?
The Meditations require no prior knowledge of Stoicism or Roman history. Marcus Aurelius was writing reminders for himself, not explanations for students. A good modern translation makes the text immediately readable. Many people find that specific passages speak directly to their current circumstances in ways that feel entirely contemporary, rather than ancient.
So it is a philosophical text that reads as a human document.
Precisely. And that quality is what has kept it continuously in print for nearly 2,000 years. It is not admired because it is historically significant. It is admired because it says things that remain true and useful in the specific conditions of ordinary life.
Thank you, Margaret. That is a thoughtful place to pause tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a pleasure.
The legacy of Stoicism in the ancient world was considerable. It became the dominant philosophical tradition among the educated Roman elite, shaped the development of Roman law through its concept of natural law and shared human reason, and influenced early Christian theology. through its emphasis on the rational structure of the universe and the importance of virtue over external fortune. When the Roman Empire became officially Christian in the 4th century, many Stoic ethical ideas were absorbed into Christian moral philosophy. The most direct modern descendant of Stoic thought is cognitive behavioral therapy, developed by the psychiatrist Aaron Beck and the psychologist Albert Ellis in the 1950s and 60s. The foundational insight of cognitive behavioral therapy is that psychological distress is produced not by events themselves but by the beliefs and interpretations we apply to events. Changing the beliefs changes the emotional response. This is a clinical application of the Stoic principle that suffering comes from our judgment of events, rather than from the events themselves.
So 2,000 years after Epictetus, psychologists rediscovered the same principle and built a clinical practice on it.
Yes, Albert Ellis explicitly acknowledged the influence of Epictetus on the development of rational emotive behavior therapy, his specific approach. The lineage is direct and acknowledged. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who developed logotherapy, articulated a parallel insight from a different direction. Having survived Auschwitz, Dachau, and other concentration camps, Frankl observed that even in conditions of absolute external deprivation, the capacity to choose one's attitude toward the situation remained. He wrote that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Frankl was not a Stoic in any formal sense, but a convergence between his insight and Epictetus' central principle reached from the experience of circumstances that Epictetus as a slave would have recognized as structurally similar to his own. The idea that the final freedom is the freedom to choose one's response to what cannot be changed is a Stoic idea, arrived at independently through experience that no philosophical school could have predicted or prescribed. Marcus Aurelius's observation that the impediment to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way, reflects the Stoic understanding of adversity, not as a deviation from the path but as the path itself. Difficulty is not what interrupts life. For the Stoics, difficulty is what life is made of, and the question is not how to avoid it, but how to engage it with the character and clarity that virtue makes possible.
So Stoicism does not promise a life without difficulty. It offers a way of inhabiting difficulty without being destroyed by it.
Yes, and modern relevance of this offer is considerable. Contemporary life produces a specific form of anxiety that the Stoics would have recognized. The anxiety that comes from attempting to control things that cannot be controlled, from making well-being contingent on all outcomes that depend on the actions of other people, on the behavior of markets, on the decisions of institutions, on events that no individual can determine. The Stoic prescription is not to stop caring about these things, but to stop making your inner stability depend on them. The philosophical conclusion the tradition supports is that suffering does not come from events themselves, but from our interpretation of. This is not a claim that events have no significance or that pain is. It is a claim that the meaning of an event is not fixed by the event itself, but by the judgment we apply to it. And since judgment is within our power, the quality of our experience is within limits, something we can shape. This is not the promise of a painless life. It is the promise of a life in which we are not simply at the mercy of what happens to us.
So Stoicism returns authority to the individual over the one thing that was always within their authority.
Yes, when we stop trying to control what is uncontrollable, we regain control over ourselves. This is the paradox at the center of Stoic practice, that the apparent surrender of control over external things is the condition for genuine control over the only thing that was ever fully ours. The Stoics did not invent this insight, but they developed it into a practice, tested it against the most extreme conditions available, and left a record of how it worked that has not been surpassed by anything that has come after it.
Thank you for staying with us tonight, and thank you, Rowan, for guiding us through the shipwreck, the painted port, the slave who taught freedom, the emperor who reminded himself how to live. Adresses keeps returning with it.
Stoicism reminds us that the question is never what has happened to us. The question is always what we will do with what we have been given.
If this conversation stayed with you, you are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. You will find other episodes here where history, ideas, and power are approached slowly. Until next time, stay with us.